Welcome to this week's episode of the Mixtape with Scott. I'm Scott Cunningham, the host. This week's episode is with an economist that's a legend to many of us, is definitely to me, because many of us learned econometrics from him. It's the Econometrician, textbook author, and early software developer, William Greene, Professor Emeritus at New York University. He's since retired and is now teaching at the University of South Florida, where he lives and has retired. Bill taught many of us econometrics, not because we took his classes, but because we used his textbook. His textbook has gone through 8 editions. It's massive. And it was very influential for many decades. I learned econometrics on that book. And as I shared with him, even though we used Wooldridge for a lot of my classes, for some reason, I always went back to Bill's book when studying for exams. I use all the books. I'm a big fan. Jeff Wooldridge, Cameron Trivedi, Mostly Harmless. But I have a real deep fondness for Bill and Bill's book. In this interview, we talked about growing up in Long Island, moving to Ohio as a kid and the disruptions that caused his family, and discovering math while he was in high school, going to college, grad school, the whole spiel that I do with most of the guests. But his path was really interesting to me to hear a little bit more about the adoption of computing in econometrics and applied work early on, and how his own skills in the area of software ended up being very complementary with econometrics, and how it sort of had a big impact on his career and really the careers of many other people through him. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But I hope you enjoy this interview as much as me. But just want to end with this little comment. The ethos of the show, for those that are tuning in for the first time, the ethos of the show is that stories matter. This is not the story of Bill Greene, Professor Emeritus at NYU. There's no such thing as the story. There's only a story told by someone, listened to. It's always got selection bias. It's always something that shapes, that gets reshaped as we hear it. But we have to try to hear the stories of other people, not make them sock puppets, and listen to them in their own words. I believe that it's important for validating the lives of other people, but I also think it's important even for navigating our own life. We need each other. We need these lights along the path of our own careers and our own lives. We need each other's stories. It's with stories, I think, that many of us, maybe not you, but me and many others, we use people's stories to navigate our own life, our own story, to make sense of it. And I think that might sound touchy-feely, but I believe it's also true for us as economists and data scientists and whoever else is listening to this. Hearing the story of economists is important because they're important and people are important and the profession is important. So I hope that you enjoy this. I'm a big fan of the Econometricians, as you know. It's so much fun to listen to their story and to learn a little bit more about our origins as applied people and as econometricians. So thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this interview. It is my pleasure to have a legend, to me anyway, a person that taught me a lot as in my career about econometrics, Dr. William Greene. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to it.
Well, for the sake of the people that are listening, I've already said your name, Bill Greene, but maybe you could sort of say the organization that you sort of are affiliated with and who pays your paycheck right now.
Well, right now I'm an emeritus professor at the Stern School of Business at NYU, but I'm teaching part-time at the University of South Florida in Tampa. So I teach an econometrics course at that university.
Awesome. Great. Well, this is really an honor, and it's really nice to meet you. Well, before we jump into the questions, I thought we could start with just an icebreaker. What's a vacation that you took as a kid with your family that, whether it was like being a little kid, well, I guess either a vacation you took as a kid with your family or as an adult with your family. What's a vacation that you still find yourself thinking about even now from time to time?
Well, as a kid, we took a trip to Washington, D.C. and saw the buildings and the government, so forth. That was a nice trip.
Mm,
As an adult, I've done several cruises with my previous family, with my current family. That's always nice.
yeah. Where all have you cruised? What's
Well,
the most interesting place that you went to?
well, we've gone to Europe, cruised the Rhine. I taught a short course in Peru, and on the way back, we stopped in Machu Picchu, which is kind of on my bucket list, actually. So that was a great trip. We really enjoyed
Wow.
that.
Wow.
Machu Picchu is just something to be seen. It's really impressive.
Huh. I don't know about that location. Where is that location?
It's on the west coast of South America.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's cool. I've actually never been on a cruise.
Is it-
You've
Well,
enjoyed them
that
all?
wasn't part of a cruise. My wife and I
Oh,
just went there. I taught a short course at the university
oh,
down there, and we stopped in Machu Picchu on the way back. That is worth seeing.
oh, wow. Wow. I'm gonna Google that. Okay, cool. Well, so let's get started. So I wanted to start when you were a kid. So where are you from originally?
Well, until I was 12, I lived in a kind of middle class North Shore suburb in Long Island. Um, when we were when I was 13, we moved to a little tiny town on the shore of Lake Erie in Ohio, which is where I went to high school, and then on to Ohio State for my undergraduate.
Okay, so you grew up in Long Island, but then you moved to Ohio when
That's
you were
correct.
in 12. Okay.
This was in 1958 to 60. It was a bad recession,
Mm.
and we moved to Ohio out of economic necessity.
Oh, what was that? I actually don't know about that recession. What that was the late 50s?
That was the late 1950s. That's correct.
Oh, what was that recession? Just out of curious if I'll forget. Well,
I'm not that kind of
are you
economist.
not that kind of economist? Yeah. That's not this kind of podcast either, I guess. We don't talk about macro recessions. I'm gonna Google that. Okay, so so what did your parents do for a living? I guess
Well, my dad was a chemical engineer,
oh,
and my mom was a homemaker, although she went to college. I don't think she was entirely happy about the way that all played out.
yeah, yeah. Shit, wait. So your dad, he lost his job in that recession at
That's
that
correct.
at that chemical that chemical engineering
I think
job?
he was with Allied Chemical Company in New York.
Oh. Did they become Allied Signal?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
So he ended up having to
I
relocate.
suspect not, by the way. I think they're still Allied Chemical.
Oh, okay. Okay. He ended up losing that job in that recession. Do you
And
remember much of that?
not really. I was only 10 or 11 years old.
Huh. That can be a difficult time to move though.
It was.
Yeah.
My mother especially was very unhappy about it. She was a dyed-in-the-wool New Yorker
Oh.
and ended up in a small town in Ohio.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Long Island. What was it like growing up in Long Island though?
It's quite nice. I mean, it's a leafy suburb,
Mm,
very comfortable.
yeah. Yeah. Did your family get up to the city a lot when you live in a place like Long Island back then?
Well, it was right next door,
Uh,
actually.
y'all would like go into town and
Well, we from time to time. My grandfather had a business in Manhattan,
mm,
so we ended up going into town every so often.
mm, mm, yeah. I've always loved New York City. The culture of it. I grew up in Mississippi, but I've always wanted to just I guess all the great so many great American movies that I grew up on, they're always in New York. So like
That's right.
my
That's
whole
right. Yeah.
childhood, I just felt like I was always eavesdropping on life in New York City.
Hmm.
Yeah. So then they moved to Ohio. Did you have any siblings?
I have a brother and a sister. My sister's older.
Yeah.
Uh,
Were they
my
much
brother's
older? Oh, sorry.
my sister's 5 years older than I am. My brother is 4 years younger.
Oh,
I'm the middle child.
so your sister, she was late high school. when the move happened.
That's correct.
So was that hard for her?
That move was disruptive for all of us, but
Yeah.
it was not like we had a choice.
Right. I had the same thing. My dad lost his job in Mississippi. He had a company that did all the payroll for the county and all these and then the personal computer kind of came and he just started losing contracts slowly, and then we
Huh.
just had to move to Memphis. But it was very hard. Yeah, moving as a kid in like seventh, eighth grade, high school is just it can be either it was hard for me. So your mom, so she was so y'all moved to Ohio. What kind of
Right.
stuff? What were your interests like? And when you were like, in middle school and high school?
Well, I was on the swim team. I played baseball. Um, I picked up an interest in math.
Mm,
The the state of Ohio has these math councils. They have these contests, so they did at the time, and I participated in some math competitions.
oh, wow. As like a 12, 13, 14-year-old, like as you were going into high school?
That was high school. That was like sophomore and junior year in high school.
That's like that math, like math Olympics, kind of getting into that high level competitive math
I guess so. I
stuff.
don't know how high level it was thinking back because I didn't start learning calculus until I was in college.
Mm.
But nonetheless, they did have these competitions.
How'd you get picked for that? Your teachers just kind of noticed, or you just
Yeah,
heard about it?
the teacher picked it up.
Huh. They could just tell. So you enjoyed math
Oh
before that
yeah,
happened?
that was the thing. I really enjoyed it. So
Hmm.
this was fun.
Hmm. So what did you love about it? What was as a kid? What did you love? Looking back, if you had to remember, what was it
Well,
that?
I think it's probably like most economists who get into that kind of work. It's like puzzle solving.
Yeah.
There's something really rewarding about that. And I used to work a lot on my homeworks with my dad.
Hmm.
That was nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Homework with the dad. That is fun. Um. Uh. So you also played baseball.
Yeah.
You were enjoying these math classes. Did you know what economics was?
I didn't really pick up economics as an interest until fairly late in college.
Hmm.
I studied operations research and statistics, but I was in the business school.
At the Ohio State.
At Ohio State. I lost my interest in being in a business school when I was a senior, dropped it and went over to the economics department and
Oh,
graduated from there.
okay. Walk me through that. So you end up going to Ohio State, and because you're living in Ohio, you end up going to Ohio State, and what you like immediately kind of sort into this kind of you're sorting into a math major, stats
Well,
major.
it was statistics and operations research. It was production management and that sort of thing.
Mm,
That was early on, although at the time Ohio State was on a quarter system, and I went to school year round. It was possible to take a million different courses
mm-hmm,
because there are three 10-week sessions
mm,
during the academic year and a summer session. So I was able to take all kinds of different courses.
mm-hmm,
And also at the time it was different from now. The business school program required several economics courses, so
mm.
I didn't all of a sudden hit it for the first time. I had to have courses in labor economics and economic history,
You even
that
had to
sort of
go
thing.
that far. It wasn't just the principal stuff. They were required
Exactly.
majors. Wow.
Yeah, the business school required something like 6 or 7 courses in economics.
Oh,
I don't think they do now,
they did back then though.
but they did, yeah. And at the time, I was taking statistics courses as well.
So what? Something starts to happen. You start getting disillusioned with one thing and curious about another thing.
Well, disillusion may be a little strong. I didn't find it very interesting,
Mm,
and there was a chance to do something more interesting in the econ department.
mm. Do you remember any of these guys' names? These professors?
Um, yeah, Michael Darby,
Mm,
he became an official at Treasury at some point. Uh, P.A.V.B. Swami, whose name you might recognize. He's an econometrician. You ever heard of these people?
No, I feel like I've heard them, but I can't place some of these. I can't. I'm not positive I have.
You know, the kind of fun thing is having gotten to where I got to in econometrics, I started hearing from people that I had taken courses from, and they were writing to me for advice about econometrics.
That must feel fun.
I still get a big kick out of that.
So
So I remember Goldberger pulling me aside and asking me about how ordered probit models work.
really?
Yeah,
Wow. Now that's something to make sure to write down. Some
that
that
was a treat. That was
yeah,
actually
I would have put that in the annual accomplishments thing they make me fill out here. Wow, that's neat. Well, wait a second. You are at Ohio State. You're not super interested. So do you just drop the OR major, the OR stats major, or do you have like a double major?
it's sort of a double major. I actually graduated from the business school at Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, I took a lot more economics courses when I decided to move over. I was sort of headed to an MBA program and changed my mind and decided I didn't want to go into an MBA program.
Oh,
So I loaded up on economics courses and applied to graduate school in economics.
oh, you graduated and it would have been a logical thing to do an MBA and you didn't want to do one.
That's right.
Oh, but you wanted to keep, but you wanted to do something. You wanted to go to do a graduate degree.
Oh, I wanted to be a professor. I decided that early on.
When did you decide that? What happened to make
Yeah,
you
fairly
that?
fairly early in college. It just seemed like a great job.
Yeah. Okay. But you weren't sure what. What was it you thought that a professor?
Well, like I said, I was into the business school,
Uh-huh.
and I was ultimately going to end up in an MBA program. I think I applied to Brown and a couple others,
Hmm.
but at that time, I lost interest in business as a subject to study.
Hmm.
And since I was required to take all these econ courses, that's where I picked it up.
Well, could you explain to me as though I'm not an economist? Like, imagine just trying to explain to somebody. They would think some people would say, well, econ and business are the same thing. What exactly was it that you started to say, no, this isn't interesting. This is kind of interesting. What's the key thing you remember
Well,
noticing?
as a business school, I had to be involved in marketing courses, accounting, finance. I still consider accounting to be among the most useful courses I ever took,
Mm-hmm.
but just as a skill, not as a profession.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, it became that way for studying business generally. And at the time, because I had to take all these economics courses, and I was able to take statistics courses,
Mm-hmm.
that was just a natural place to move sideways into a
Mm-hmm.
new field. Um, I was also able to take econometrics classes. I took some graduate econometrics classes as an undergraduate, and that worked out well.
Yeah.
So I discovered econometrics and statistics fairly early on.
Do you remember kind of feeling something as an undergrad in those econometrics classes and going, I think I might be better at this than I might be really good at this. Do you kind of remember any sort of feeling like this
Well,
might actually be a good fit?
I certainly enjoyed it. I hate to say I didn't enjoy the some of the courses very much. They weren't taught very well, but the material came through anyway.
Yeah.
So I just developed a liking for the field.
Mm, mm,
Econometrics just seemed really interesting. Econometrics and statistics. Just coincidentally, I had a job at Ohio State uh, to sort of do work study kind of thing, and I worked in the computer lab. So
mm.
I was hanging around with statisticians and statistics majors and economists, and that all fit together very nicely.
Do you think that I don't want to prime this conversation, but this is something I was going to ask about later. You know, were you sort of unique in your age cohort of economists, econometricians for sort of taken advantage of or being knowledgeable about computers? I'm just thinking about I want to ask you about LimDep in a little bit, but like
Mhm.
it seems like you were quick to capitalize on computers in ways that maybe not as many people did. But what I don't know if that question makes any
I
sense.
know it makes great sense, and I think you're right. When I was in Madison, there was kind of a wave of this kind of work going on there.
Hmm.
There were a couple of pieces of software that were written at the time I was there,
Hmm.
and it was part of a general, I don't want to call it a trend, but just there was an island of work, kind of creative work in that area. There were a couple of statistics packages that grew up at Wisconsin at that time, and also a professor named Carl Jorskog
Hmm.
went through there. He was a friend of Goldberger's,
Hmm.
and he had a lot to do with some of the emerging software at the time.
Hmm.
And he came through Madison, and there were a bunch of working papers that came out of his work, and I just picked that up as I went along.
So at Wisconsin is where you're beginning to kind of interact with software a little bit more. You're not doing that as an undergrad, I guess. You're like,
No,
at,
I did. In my
oh,
senior year at Ohio State, I worked in a data lab.
oh, that was the lab. Okay, got it.
Yeah. And I was managing the statistics packages, we're talking really primitive here. This was a long time ago. These were the boxes of cards.
Right, right.
There's a package called the biomedical BMDP. You ever heard of that?
No.
Okay, there was a software package. It grew up into something, but I was responsible for managing that suite of programs.
What does that mean to manage a box of cards?
So, well, so you to run the program, you had to use the source code that was on those cards,
Uh-huh.
and we're talking the primitive days of computing here. At a time when software was encoded on 80 column cards.
Mm-hmm.
And to run a program, you would first feed the cards to a card reader, which contained the language,
Mm-hmm.
and then that would get translated after being read internally into a computer.
Mm.
You got to imagine how far back this
I
goes.
can't even wrap my head around what we're talking about right now.
I know I teaching my MBA students at NYU once. I took a survey of the class, and he asked how many of them had any idea what an 80 column punch card was. This class was about 60 people.
Yeah,
Not one knew what it was.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know what it was because my dad was a programmer, but it was more like I knew, I've never touched one, so I've never like had to do it.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question. I read this article and they were saying that, right now a lot of students don't think in terms of hierarchical directories, like something about the way that they've grown up with like Google search and with phones that search. When they teach these econometrics or statistics classes, students aren't always naturally building up like layered directories. And the article was written where it was like, talking about the challenges of this transition. But I just was like reading it and I thought, what's weird is my brain just thinks really in terms of spreadsheets and directories. It's like
Right.
data is a spreadsheet and you navigate directories because I grew up on DOS. And so I'm just
Well, that
wondering,
marks you as pretty old too, by the way.
I know. We had a PS2 Model 30 and I ran a bulletin board and as a little kid, when I moved, and when in Mississippi, when I moved in the 8th grade, I started a bulletin board and just like all my friends were hackers. But so let me ask something is when you grow up on punch cards and you program in punch cards, do you think about data and programming in a way that is almost antiquated when you move into the way stuff
Um,
is done with,
that may overstate it. I learned computing at Ohio State. I learned it with several languages. I
uh-huh.
learned something called assembly language, which is as primitive as it gets.
Yeah.
We used to say that's down close to the metal.
Yeah.
I also learned to program in Fortran and COBOL, which I
Yeah.
gather COBOL still exists, and Fortran is a language of choice in some fields.
Mm-hmm.
And these languages evolved, but what evolved at the same time was the software based on these languages, and this is what's causing the changes that you were talking about. Better algorithms and better search algorithms mean you can search for material in different ways
Mm-hmm.
and find and locate information in different ways more efficiently than before.
Mm-hmm.
And students get used to using those tools.
Right.
Even now, you can think, well, people use R, which is a very high level language, but it is a programming language.
Yeah.
So R has supplanted more primitive languages like Fortran.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people are not used to programming the way that Fortran requires because they can use R, which has big procedures.
Yeah.
A short name invokes a lot of computing that
Mm.
otherwise had to be done in piecemeal.
Right. 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 So, so you're in college, you are managing software, basically. You go to Wisconsin and do you enter into the Wisconsin cohort, do you think, with like some natural human capital around software that was a little bit scarce for that?
Probably so, yes.
You think do you remember your faculties making note of it at all?
Um, I don't know if the faculty did. I used to be a sort of internal consultant with other graduate students.
Hmm.
I helped them with computing.
Hmm. Did you ever notice to yourself, I might have skills that aren't just econometrics, but that are really complementary to econometrics? Did you ever?
Well, this computing business, and I think it's still the case, is a very useful and powerful complement
Mm-hmm.
to the skills, whatever skills those are,
Mm-hmm.
that the one brings into being an economist.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Totally. So you get in and out of Wisconsin really fast. Wikipedia has you getting there in 72 and graduating in 76. Is that
That's
right?
correct. That's correct.
Was that fast back then? That's so fast now.
It was pretty fast. The day that I took my final oral exam, three people did it that day.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite an unusual day.
Wisconsin, so the mode would have been 5 back then,
Yeah,
and so you were. So why did you get in and out so fast? You think?
I was just able to finish what had to get done.
What'd you work on?
Well, my major undergraduate or graduate was in econometrics and I guess microeconomics. My thesis was about production and cost functions.
Is that JP? Was that your job market paper? That one?
Yes,
That was
it
your job
is.
market paper.
That's
Oh,
correct.
wow, wow,
And there was a second one that was sort of similar to it, but the JPE paper took up most of the meat of that study.
wow. What did it feel like getting a JP on your job market paper?
That's
Like,
pretty exciting.
it was you
But wait a minute, that wasn't my first paper.
really, it wasn't. What was your paper?
I got a paper in Econometrica.
Whoa.
Well, now wait a minute. I have a suspicion that it's the shortest paper ever published in Econometrica.
Oh yeah.
I submitted this. It was a really econometrics paper, but they didn't really like it. They said, "Well, you could make it a note." They used to do notes,
Uh-huh.
so this 25-page paper became 4 pages.
Oh
They
man, that's a
didn't.
skill.
But now wait, they didn't like the 4 pages either. So I ended up with about a 6 or 7 line paragraph.
Oh gosh,
That,
that's amazing.
and that was my first paper in Econometrica.
Wow. Has that been cited much?
I don't think it's ever been cited.
That's amazing. I didn't know to get a 25-page econometric article down to 6 or 7 lines must be brilliant. That to be able to do
Well,
that.
I don't know if they would use the word brilliant.
If they told me to get something down from 25 pages down, it would just be 25 different pages. It was just, I have no ability to get it shorter. That's amazing. You don't go directly to NYU. You go to this thing, Civil Aeronautics Board.
No, I went to Cornell University.
Oh,
My
okay.
first job was at Cornell,
Oh, that was your first job. Okay.
1976 to 1981. I was at Cornell.
Oh, why do I have something about so I thought I saw that you went to the Civil Aeronautics Board in
I
DC.
did. I went to the CAB in '82, but for the summer.
Oh,
I just took a summer job at the CAB.
Wikipedia doesn't even mention Cornell, and then it has something you
Is
just
that
did.
right?
Yeah, we need to.
Okay.
It's impossible to update anything on Wikipedia anymore. But you have to get past the editor cartel. They're hard to get past. So
I remember there's a Wikipedia page for LimDep. We
yeah.
had to
Oh,
we had to we had to edit it, and then there were a bunch of trolls running the show.
yeah.
It was like getting past Attila the Hun.
Yeah. I think that's probably still true. Who knows what Chat GPT is doing to the Wikipedia community though. All right, so you go to Cornell. So you're there for 5 years. So what was that like?
Um,
Do you
Not
like that
very.
time?
It wasn't the best time of my life. Cornell's department was pretty good, but they were number 16. They always thought they should have been number 11.
Ah,
Um,
that's a big jump. That one
yeah,
you got to do a lot of
it,
things to
it was
change.
okay. It was okay. It was a nice job. And I know we used to teach our classes in the morning and then go skiing in a nearby ski area in the afternoon. That's kind of nice arrangement.
Mm,
And the scenery around there is terrific. Living upstate is kind of nice.
yeah, you were kind of back
Uh,
home a little bit.
um,
Not totally, but I mean,
Not
how far away is that
really.
from Long Island?
A couple 100 miles.
Oh, okay. It's totally different. Yeah, it's like you're not
Yeah,
can't just drive up through town.
it's upstate New York, which
Got it.
is but upstate New York is beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a nice place to live. Ithaca is a nice leafy town,
Mm-hmm.
interesting town.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Cornell as a place to work was okay. The students were great.
Who were
Really,
some of the
really.
econometricians that were your colleagues?
Well, Nick Kiefer was the main person.
Yeah.
Um, can't think of. While I was still there, I taught the two graduate econometrics classes that they offered.
Yeah.
And then Nick came and they could broaden the program a little bit, but I left soon after he, or maybe a year or two after he came.
So you're doing this like empirical IO econometrics.
I
That's
guess that's
if
right.
I like had
Yeah.
to describe the research agenda, would that be accurate? Although now I think of you as
It's rather different from contemporary IO,
yeah,
but uh, at the time, I guess you'd think of it as industrial organization.
yeah, because you're
My
doing
my
cost
thesis in
function.
the JPE paper was about economies of scale,
Mm,
which fed into restructuring the electricity business.
so it's kind of getting into like regulatory.
Yes.
That's is that the connection with this summer thing at the CAB?
No.
No,
No.
so
The
that's
summer
not.
thing at the CAB was just a summer job I took. I was going to be leaving Cornell soon after that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So it's like you're working on empirical IO, but you don't feel comfortable kind of calling it that. Would you have called it that back then though? Empirical IO? Did they have that phrase back then?
Well, they did, and I wouldn't say it was the same thing. It was more econometrics.
It was.
I did do a subfield in what we called industrial organization at the time.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It's rather different from what we think of as applied micro, which is what it evolved into.
Bill, I don't understand the distinction. So it's like, why wouldn't it just be why would it be econometrics and not like IO? You're
The, the,
talking
par-
about
the
something subtle.
paradigm of IO has changed completely
Mm-hmm.
since then. Um, in the 1970s, we're talking about uh, a methodology pioneered by Leonard Weiss and a couple other people who looked at oligopoly models
Uh-huh.
and behavior of oligopolies. And that's the meat of what would have been called industrial organization at the time.
Mm. Hmm.
And then you had theories of regulation, but rather unlike it's done now.
Well,
That group has evolved.
but are you kind of describing in your own specialization that you know that you felt like you were more of an econometrician in those applications? Is that what you're kind of saying? Because
Yes,
that's what you're trying to say. Okay,
that is correct. I
I
thought of
see.
my graduate work as econometrics.
Oh, well, so then how would you have described, like, in your research statement, in like 1985, like the last 10 years, what would you have said, like, is your up to that point, what your like research agenda was in econometrics?
Well, by 1985, I was involved in two rather narrower subfields, discrete choice modeling, which was beginning at that time. So I was in that early,
Mm,
and also frontiers and efficiency. Stochastic frontiers and efficiency. I was one of the early people in that area.
mm. How did you get into those two things? Was that a natural progression from where you started, or was that like a big jump?
The discrete choice stuff just flowed out of my work I was doing writing LimDep. Actually, to tell you the truth, in both of these cases, they're just things I found interesting
Yeah.
that I encountered in the literature. They seemed really intriguing, so I followed through with them.
We need to talk about LimDep now that it's been brought up twice. So because now it looks like it's going to matter for the other conversation. So what, for those people that are listening, some of them have never heard of LimDep. So can you tell us what that is?
Well, they may have heard of Logit. LimDep, when it was first being written, was about the Tobit model.
Mm.
I wrote code to fit Tobit models that my colleagues in the graduate program were using. And then,
At Cornell or at
no,
NYU?
at Wisconsin,
It was, oh, this was all the way back in at grad school.
I started doing this stuff when I was in graduate school.
Oh, you were writing this code for the Tobit model in graduate school, and your colleagues were using it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh.
And I also, if I think back to the earliest work I did, I wrote another program for multinomial logit.
Mm-hmm.
And these two things sat side by side. And my thinking was, well, I could hook these things together and not have separate pieces of software for these two functions.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Mm-hmm.
that doing that requires not only the operations themselves, but an interface so the user can tell the software which one it wants, where the data are, and that's the beginnings of an interface language.
What's an interface language? What does that mean? That's the end
That that that
user.
that's the means by which a user communicates to the software what they want to do. You're used to doing this. You do this.
Uh-huh.
Uh, you've done empirical work. You ever fit a probit model?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what'd you use? Stata?
Yeah, it's all there. I mean, I use R
Oh,
because they make me, but I use Stata.
okay. So Stata has a command, probit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It takes computer code to resolve your desire to fit a probit model with the machinery inside the software that will do it.
So until you're making this interface software, what are your in counterfactual? What are people being forced to do instead?
Um, I'm trying to think. We're not as early on in the development of software as it might seem. There were elaborate packages. So there was something called TSP,
Yeah, TSP. We had to use it.
which was
Clint, right?
developed.
There was a guy named Clint that ran it.
Yeah.
That was my professor, Scott Atkinson. He was always calling Clint on the phone to like get something added or something.
Yes, I remember. I don't remember Clint's last name, but I know who you're talking about. So TSP was developed in the 1960s, 1970s,
Mhm.
and it contained an interface. It was an elaborate package. TSP was an amazing piece of work. I mean, they got it was appreciated at the time what a great piece of work it was.
Hmm.
It's not like people discovered later. They knew when it was being done. And I think the TSP was the first econometrics package that allowed the user to specify a model symbolically
Hmm.
and write down a model in the program's own code, but where you say probe it and then you list the set of variable names, that's the protocol between you and the program.
Yeah.
So you feed that stream of characters and the program knows how to turn that into a command to fit a probe it model and use the data identified with those names in the model.
Yeah. And you're writing LimDep
Yeah.
for models that obviously TSP doesn't have, I guess. That's the problem. It's like
Um,
software
yes.
limitation.
The multinomial logit model was invented in the latest 1960s, maybe in the beginning of the 70s. So there existed a program that could fit the multinomial logit model because Nurlov and Press did it, and McFadden and Train did it. But uh, what I did was stitch these things together inside a bigger package that had a menu of things that you could choose from. Once I had the multinomial logit and the Tobit model stuck together in the same package, it was then easy with a kind of hub and spoke design to staple onto that a probit estimator, which it's a very short step from Tobit to probit.
Right.
And then things I picked up along the way, the menu grew, the package grew.
So is this like a side gig that you're kind of doing as a grad?
Yeah, very much so.
But people are asking for it, but there's no email. So how are you getting this? How are you getting this software to people? You're mailing something to them in the mail or something?
Um, Trying to remember now. I I distributed. Let's get the timing right. So when I was in graduate school, it was all within the department at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Didn't get out.
circulated within the department.
Uh, I was at Cornell that I first started sending it to other people.
Oh, what are you sharing? It's not a floppy disk.
That's an interesting question. So at the very beginning, I used to distribute it on 9-inch reels of tape,
Mm,
computer tapes. Now there's like 800 feet of
what
tape on an.
own personal copy of this tape? Or are you copying it for someone? That's got to be
No,
expensive.
I would go to the bookstore and buy their current stock of tapes, and I would copy the software onto these tapes.
What'd that cost?
They weren't that expensive. The computer tapes were pretty cheap.
You're just giving it away to people?
I wasn't giving it away. I think I first got money for it in 19 early 1970s. I think I was at Cornell.
Hmm. So like what would happen? Somebody writes you a letter in the mail at Cornell and you're like, some
I
guy at,
I'm trying to remember when email made its way into this, and I'm sort of missing the thread here. There's a gap in my memory.
Dad, I remember when we moved to Memphis, Memphis State had a Vax account and Unix account emails for the faculty, and that would have been like late 89. But I want to say isn't it more the 80s when there's a lot of this adoption of email?
Yes, yeah, it is. You're right. And it was in the 80s that I started distributing the program. And originally, when I did it, I distributed the source language on tape.
You just stick it in a box, you'd like package it and you'd send it to some professor at Chicago or something.
That's correct.
Huh. Who are some of the early people that were writing you that I would know about?
Oh, there's a club out there. I can't think of names. One of them was my wife, who used it with some colleagues of hers.
She was a faculty or PhD student in economics.
Not in my department, but yes.
Oh, and so she wrote you and wanted a copy of, and they're
She,
what are they
she,
asking for, Bill? They're asking for I want, it's basically the equivalent of I want your multinomial logit code. I want your Tobit code. Is that what they're asking?
that's correct.
And you're over time, you're going, well, now I'm going to add in conditional logit, or I'm going to add in, like, I'm going to you started adding in
That's right.
limited dependent variable model.
Exactly. And that's where the name came from.
LimDep.
Yes.
How big did it get?
Well, you
It's a
you
big
got to
company.
you got to come up to the present. Well, as a company, it never got very big. Although I don't know, they do gross revenue over the entire span of time is in the millions.
Yeah.
It's not large now. The methodology of software has changed, although we still sell some.
How did that feel? Did it make you feel like you're an entrepreneur to kind of
Well,
do
I
that?
always made the decision, do I want to be a businessman or do I want to be a professor?
That's
And I
right.
decided I wanted to be a professor.
Yeah, because you had that bad experience in business school back when you were a kid. Uh,
Yeah, well, I liked the academy. I liked being inside a university.
well, uh, how many before you sold it? How many models did LimDep software have inside of it that you had personally created?
Oh, there was a pile of them. I learned how to do regression,
Hmm.
two-stage least squares, probit, a couple of variations of probit and logit, multinomial logit, that kind of thing. There was a handful. That stuff continues to grow.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Some of these are new techniques that have grown up in that time. Like, for example, the mixed logit models are creatures of the last, say, 12 years.
Well, so pivoting a little bit to the textbook,
Yeah.
does textbook get born out of all of this activity in a way? I mean, I know
Yeah.
all this stuff is compound.
Well, I can nail down on why I wrote the textbook, actually.
Yeah.
And you're right, there is a connection there. At the time that I started writing that textbook, the bestseller was Tile. Are you familiar with that?
Oh.
Okay, that was written by Henri Tile, Henri, last name Theil.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and
That name.
if you take a look at that book, it does linear regression from cover to cover.
Uh-huh.
There's an advanced topics chapter at the end of the book, which is the probit model with one exogenous variable.
Mm.
And this was at a time I was doing all this work on limited and qualitative variables.
Yeah.
This is, and I'm thinking there's an opening in the market here
Yeah.
for a book on these sorts of topics.
Mm.
Now, the profession doesn't take kindly to young professors writing textbooks,
Yeah.
but
Wait,
I was far enough along. I was like 10 years into my career.
you were at NYU?
Uh, I I had yes, this took place at NYU,
So you're like, this is like what, like 85?
thereabouts. Yeah,
That's
it took quite a long time to write it because I took a 2-year hiatus.
I mean, I only know the later editions, and it's a huge textbook. So was the first edition a big textbook like that?
Yeah, it
It's
was.
comprehensive. I mean, when I think of the book, I don't think of a book that's just qualitative dependent variables.
No. It's meant to be a complete course in econometrics.
You were motivated because of this gap that Tile did not really his was not comprehensive. It did not cover.
Well, there were other books at the time. There was one by Jack Johnston.
Huh?
There was a very famous book by Arthur Goldberger,
Yeah.
Econometric Theory,
Yeah.
and it struck me that there was room here to start building nonlinear models, and creative people were using nonlinear techniques, and these weren't taught in the textbook.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I wrote that.
So let me ask you, why aren't you at this time content to just write your papers and teach your classes? Why are you like making companies and creating software for people and writing these, major, very valuable textbooks? What is it about you at this time that makes you be different in that way, if you had to explain it to me?
Well, it was just work I enjoyed. I mean, these things fit naturally together,
Yeah.
going back to when I was in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have to admit, I enjoy the consulting role, not consulting to make money, but the consulting role that makes people write to me and ask me questions about econometrics just for their own work. I enjoy that.
Yeah.
That's a powerful motivator.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So some of this was that, but I never wanted to go into business. I mean, a lot of what Stata does, LimDep did before Stata did it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had decided to go be an entrepreneur, I guess that I would have competed in that market with them. But it was never what I wanted to do.
Right. Do you remember? It was Finis Welch, right? That starts Stata.
That's correct.
You remember noticing Stata like being advertised for the first time or anything like that?
Not really, no.
Were they in competition with each other? I mean, they sounds like they are, but is that true?
Well, it was never very strong competition because Stata and SAS embarked on a path to be large software companies.
Uh-huh.
There are large economies of scale here.
Yeah. Right. 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 You would have had to leave academia and devote yourself to it.
There's a guy named David Lillian
Uh-huh.
who he was a time series economist at I think UC Irvine.
Mm-hmm.
He developed a package called micro TSP,
Yeah. I
which
thought
evolved.
TSP. That's not TSP.
No, it's not. It evolved into becoming eViews.
Ah, yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay, well, Lillian ultimately left academia to be eViews. He ultimately sold the package for an enormous amount of money. But that was a career path. He left the academy,
Yeah. Right.
and that's what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
That was just never the path I wanted to take.
Hmm. You thought about it though.
I considered it.
Yeah. Didn't take long though. That you were
No,
like, good.
being a professor was worth having.
Yeah. So the textbook, you spent 2 years writing this massive, it was big. It was like a
No,
big,
I spent more than 2 years writing it.
oh, you had,
Altogether probably took four.
oh, 4 years.
Yeah,
Well, so what was the immediate response by the market to the book?
it's been fabulous.
No, I mean like that first edition. What surprised?
It,
And it became a huge, huge book. So I'm just curious what you saw
no,
at the,
it did very well from early on.
hmm.
It really did.
The difference was
I
it
mean,
a
it,
different?
it it's not that big a market.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So when I say it did very well, my kids got to go to college, but I didn't get a tutor house in the country.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So what do you think? Um, why did it do well? If you had to explain it to me.
I I worked very hard to make it appeal to a wide audience, and whatever formula I was using, it must have worked.
What do you think that formula was? What makes it different?
Well,
It's fast.
Now, if you look at um, Jeff Wooldridge's Econometrics text
Hmm.
and Cameron and Trivedi's Microeconometrics, those are the main competitors.
Yeah.
They the example that riffles through both of those books and through economists do this habitually is a wage equation.
Yep.
And I thought, well, there's more to life than wage equations.
Right.
So I've got examples from political science,
Yep.
from engineering, from transport economics. One of my favorites is a model for pricing Monet paintings,
Mm,
auction prices. It just I wrote it to appeal to a big audience, a wide audience. Political science, sociology.
did you give people access to LimDep? You like give?
I did. I think it was the fourth edition had a CD tucked into the back.
Yeah, I remember those old CDs in the books. Those were great.
Yeah, but it didn't. It wasn't a big hit.
How long a big giant reel of tape on the first edition?
No, no. It was by that time. It was a CD.
It was a CD.
Yeah,
Wow. What an achievement. You must be so proud of it. I mean,
I am.
yeah.
That's the big nut in my career.
Ah, it's fantastic. I mean, it's just well, so what? Are you gonna keep doing it? You got a
No,
ninth edition that you're
no, it's done. That's
done.
it. There won't be a ninth edition.
Does the publisher come to you and say, we want there to be a ninth edition, we're gonna bring on this kid?
Now the publisher came to me and said they wanted an eighth edition, but I think my run may be nearly over.
That
I
was
mean, it had a great run, but I think the profession has moved on.
that's fabulous.
So there won't be a ninth edition.
Yeah, uh that's the book that I studied for the prelims on with at Georgia.
Yeah, I get a lot of mail about the book. That, like I said,
You know what it
that's
is?
the biggest thing.
I love Jeff Wooldridge. I'd take a bullet for him, but the book I just noticed I kept pulling out to study for the prelim, even though the panel class we used Jeff's, I just kept using yours. I don't know what it was. I still don't know what it is. I
Well,
found.
I'll tell you, the book has 100,000 citations.
Oh, does it really?
Yeah,
Wow. Well, that must make you feel so great.
yeah, it's catching on. That's worth having.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let me kind of wrap things up because it's top of the hour. This kind of just a conclusion. If you could go back and talk to that kid at Wisconsin who was a PhD student, 1972 to 1976, let's say your second year, let's say like early in the program. Okay, they've still got a little bit of a road left, and I don't mean like a generic kid. If you could go back and talk to that kid, what do you think that the young Bill Greene would really benefit from knowing if you could just tell him about, not necessarily tell him what's going to happen, but tell him what's important, that like without giving them a clue of like, these are the events that are going to happen in your life. What if you could just go back to them and say, this is what's important, in my opinion, that that I want to give you as a gift. What do you think that they would really benefit from?
I think the most satisfying aspect of my career since then has always been this working to help other people with their work.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought about LimDep and that textbook as helping other people be better at what they do.
Yeah.
So that's the most satisfying aspect
Mm.
of my career.
Hmm. You think that would have resonated with the young Bill Greene to know that his older self really has enjoyed helping people?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Well, you have helped a lot. You've helped me. I am a huge admirer of you, and really benefited from the book. I'm one of the 100,000, I guess, or one of the millions or whatever that have just so benefited from you teaching econometrics and
I'll tell you, there's a resource that I have as a teacher.
huh?
People write to me with questions about their work
Yeah.
because of the textbook. I call these 911 calls,
Yeah.
and I use them in my classes all the time
Oh,
because I figure people get to see what other people just like them
right.
are asking.
Yeah.
That the stuff that I'm teaching, people really use it.
Yep. Yep. Well, boy, we've all benefited from your generosity. It's funny. No, I really appreciate it. Well, this has been a wonderful call. Just to hear, I mean, this talking to you is one of these things where I always conclude and think maybe we should do a part two. So I might bother you for a part two one day of hearing more of your story, but just hearing just a little bit of what it's been like, on your journey is just so neat. So I really appreciate your sharing all this with me and talking to me and indulging on random questions.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. You have a great day.
Okay, you too.
Gotta see us through.